evening. Welcome to History and Hops. This is the finale of our fourth season of doing this. We'll have another season starting in September. Haven't got anybody booked for September yet, so let me know your ideas. I only have about 100 different things that I'm working on, so we'll see. It'll be a surprise to me too, I guess. Tonight, though, it will be a special guest that has come to a number of our History and Hops, and I've been after him for quite a while once I found out he has a really interesting past life. I never knew him in his life here in Seaside. I don't know if we should raise hands or not. See how many people actually were before Judge Moberg. Everybody put their hands. Sit on your hands. Sit on your hands. Yes, okay. Or availed themselves of his services across the street. You know, through the museum, I got to know Bob and meeting him here a few times. He has a great interest and involvement in the Native American history here. But when I asked him what he wanted to talk about, he wanted to talk about his history in fishing. And it was kind of funny, one of the recent things I'm doing, and I would hope to continue, is something called oral histories. And not too long after Bob agreed to do one about his history with fishing, I was listening to one that he did about 10 years ago. And I just happened to be walking up towards this end of town. Bob called me with a couple of questions about History and Hops and what it was about. And I said, hey Bob, do you remember doing an oral history about 10 years ago? And he said, oh yeah. And so I got a little insight on what's going to go on here tonight. This will be very interesting. Bob will be available to answer questions afterwards. Partway through here, we're going to actually show a video that was made in the late 80s about fishing. Very interesting. I saw it once before somewhere, and it'll give you a great history. So, without me saying anything else, here's Bob Moberg.
Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate being here at the second floor of this building, as this was the location of the municipal court for Seaside before we moved across the street at City Hall. I think it was 30 years ago. The jury box, you would be sitting in the jury box right over here. You can judge me if you wish. And this was where the bench was, and the city council sat up here at the bench, and the judges, Steve Campbell and myself, presided over the city court for about 20 years before we moved across the street. Interestingly, we could not find photographs of the second floor. So if any of you have any photographs, the city council, or the board, or anybody else, please let Steve know, or myself know, or Jimmy downstairs. They've done a magnificent job of restoring this building. I don't know how many of you remember that it sat vacant for a number of years, and how many of you remember when the roof blew off the City Hall, and it ended up right down there in the street in the front yard of Moberg and Rust. So they've done a great job, and I congratulate them for restoring a piece of history, Seaside's history. Now, Steve indicated I've been asked to come tonight to discuss some of the history of the gillnetting and those who use nets and fish to earn a living in the Columbia River. The way of life of the gillnetting is all but gone now, but there's still some old-timers like Denny Holmes and John England, and I can name a number of other individuals who were involved in the industry. My father, this is the old City Hall. Look at the tree and look at the configuration of the old City Hall. It was a beautiful building, but fell into a state of disrepair over the years. Concerning the gillnetting, my father and grandfather, as well as myself, were gillnetters on the river. My grandfather having immigrated from Sweden in 1898. His family had apparently gillnetted on the rivers in Sweden. Carl was also a professional duck hunter, but that's a story for another day. However, part of my family goes back even further, but that involved the Native Americans and their way of fishing, the Chinook ancestors on my mother's side, who fished for maybe hundreds or thousands of years using a form of net that could extend out 100 feet. They used cedar bark, and they also used, that's my grandfather, a derby. See how well dressed he was? They always dressed this way all the time. But the Native Americans used cedar bark and spruce root nets. But you know that gillnetting and the use of nets for fishing goes back maybe 2,000 years at least. Peter used a form of what was probably a net in the Gospel of John, chapter 21. Tells us that St. Peter fished all night and missed the fish completely. I empathize with him. Next morning, Peter was told to put out the net on the starboard side. Some of the versions of the Bible say right side, but we know it's not right. And he ended up catching 153 large fish. I wasn't a very good fisherman, to be quite honest with you. I could miss them completely. Tonight I've been asked also to show a documentary on gillnetting, which we will see a little bit later. It was put together by Jim Bergeron and Irene Martin. After the Native American commercial fishing began in about 1850 on the Columbia River, the settlers fished all up and down the Salida Falls. Later, fish traps were used. This goes back to the fish traps which you just saw. The remnants of the pilings that can still be seen on the river. The traps used pilings driven on the shoreline, mainly on the Washington side of the river. Sometime later, horse seining was introduced onto the Columbia River. And these are photographs of the horse seining. It was brought apparently from Nova Scotia, using Clydesdale horses out on the sandbars in the middle of the Columbia River. Fishermen used bars in the sands of Desdemona, Taylor, the Means, Miller Sand, Kiva Sands. Those who grew up around here know these sandbars out in the middle of the Columbia River. Some claim that there were up to 100 seining ground operations on the Columbia River at one time. They used long nets which would float down along the sandbars, and in effect they would corral the fish, the horses being hooked onto the end of the nets, and they would pull the fish in to the sandbar. Salmon love to swim close to the sandbars, as Bill Gunderson will tell us later tonight in Work Is Our Joy, the documentary. These operations were outlawed in 1950. They were really too effective.
Well, who's in the picture there?
That is my cousin Maureen Miles. It used to be Miles. Kevin knows her family very well. This picture actually made it to Life magazine, as I understand. She was on the seining ground, and that's actually a seining net that they'd taken the fish off of, and took a photograph of her. Maureen is still alive, and she was at her 15 minutes of fame. This also was on one of the seining ground bars that we talked about, and if you'll notice, each one of the people in the photograph have a salmon, including the baby. This is Rebecca Rubin's family, which were distant cousins of mine, and I believe this was on Kiva Sands, which is straight out from Brownsmead, Oregon. So if you go across the bridge to Washington from Astoria, you'll see the pilings, which apparently were part of the Desdemona Sands. Captain Fritz Elving operated his ferry boats. Some of you know, one of which is now at the 39th Street Pier in Astoria. He operated the ferry approximately where the bridge is now, and would land in Washington and ferry the cars back and forth. As he would pass, the passengers would be able to see the horses on the sandbars, and Captain Elving, the Scandinavians, would remark, "Ja, we have horses that walk on water." Loosely translated, we have horses walking on water. Captain Elving immigrated from Sweden about the same time as my grandfather. Both were great ice skaters in the lakes, and part of the river used to freeze east of Astoria, close to Napa, and they would ice skate and have competitions. At one time, there were as many as 55 canneries on the river, canning being the only practical way of preserving the fish. In 1883, there were 30,200,000 individual cans of salmon produced from the Columbia River. We now freeze the great bulk of any fish caught. The salmon catch mainly hatchery-grown fish. Gillnetting was also used to catch steelhead, blueback salmon, coho, chum, salmon, sturgeon, and smelt, or certainly the king or the Chinook salmon was the prize. It was a way of life. Gillnetting was down the Columbia River. For 70 to 80 years, they fished two-person boats, sailed in our boats without power. These boats, it was hard to get out of the way of anything or get to anything. Later, the bow picker was used because you could pick the net up by hand in the bow in front of the boat. There was a fishing season for the spring chinook in February, and I remember with my father, and this is a picture of him. Again, note how well dressed he was. He would go out in February, and the net would freeze and fish for smelt, and as well as for the chinook. Sometimes he would fish for 2 weeks in the chilly river before he would catch the first fish. There was always great celebration when that first fish was caught. There was a season most of the month of May, and a season in June and July, but the main season was in August. And fished almost exclusively below the bridge, from the bridge all the way to the bar, week 10, week 12, week 8. All of this was at night, so the salmon could not see the fish. These are my boat in the upper pictures, and that's waiting in line to deliver the fish. It was in 1983. Really the last time that I fished on the Columbia River. There's been very few seasons since that time. Most of the fishing was done below the Astoria-Magdalen Bridge, and there were many impediments to the fishing. There's a lighthouse, a Clatsop Spit on the Oregon side. Washington side, there were jetties to contend with. Trying to make sure that 1,500 feet or 250 fathoms of net would not end up in the spit or on the jetties was always a challenge. Quite honestly, boat fear scared the hell out of me, and we still had to do it when I was 15, 16, 17 years of age. I still have nightmares, or as fishermen we call them, netmares, about getting the net out between cars and other obstacles on commercial Broadway streets, the streets taking the place of the river. The season always ended on August 25th, just in time to go back to college. High schoolers went back to school. I remember practicing daily double football practices by day and fishing at night. Vince Dulcich was our coach, and he was a Gillnetter himself, and he was understanding. College usually had 2 or 3 days to get back to school in Salem. Going back, my father actually brought me on the boat at 9 or 10 years of age, fished in Astoria and Alaska. These are Alaska boats that we fished. They're bow pickers. And we fished in the bay, which is about 25 miles wide. It's north of the Aleutian chain. These are bow pickers. Sometimes we would fish, usually 2 people in the boat. Sometimes there were 1, but I fished with my brothers, John, Alan, Tom, and my sister Marcia, and a gentleman by the name of Charlie Lucanen, who was my neighbor, the circuit judge in Hope County. And nets were made originally of linen before nylon, and on weekends they had to be pulled into bluestone tanks, chemical to preserve the nets. The net racks, where the nets were pulled onto to be mended, were social places, and many of the fishermen were uneducated but very smart. Fishing closed at Saturday noon for escapement and resumed at 6 p.m. on Sunday nights. And the boats traveling about an hour to get to the fishing grounds. Now, instead of months of open season, we have only a few days. I would work on the off season at my father's float or cork mill. He made the corks for the gill nets. This is one of those. The cork mill was at the foot of 49th Street in Astoria. Some 3 million of the cedar corks were produced in about a 10-year period of time, according to the Heritage Museum. All were made on hand lathes, and it was quite a production. During the winter, many of us would stack tuna at cold storage. My father began traveling to Bristol Bay, Alaska in 1959 for Bumblebee Seafoods as the gillnetting started to slow and his cork business was not feeding the family. I followed him with my brothers, and this is one of my brothers that I was fishing with, Alan, and I was standing in the bow. We came through a storm from Bristol Bay into the Naknek River. We had about 2,000 fish when we started. We had 1,800 after we got into the river, because quite honestly we threw 200 overboard, scared that the pump would not keep pumping and we wouldn't make it into the river. The wind can blow in Bristol Bay, Alaska. It can blow very hard. We fished company boats. This is a scow, which we would deliver. In front of the scow is Bill Canessa. Bellevue was the name of the scow. He's down in the left-hand corner. I don't know how many fish were aboard, but this is after they would have picked up the salmon from all the fishermen who would deliver the fish out into the bay. We received 67 cents for each of the fish, but all of our expenses were paid. I have fond memories of Alaska, as I met my wonderful wife about 50 years ago. We traveled to Bristol Bay, Alaska to work in the canneries for the summer. I see other cannery workers here that also worked in Alaska. My parents, Kathy's parents, didn't have enough money to send us to college, so we were able to make enough money to pay for the next year's college, most of the summers that we worked there. In Alderbrook, which is in East Astoria, I lived close by and worked with Cecil Moberg. My uncle, who was some 30 years ago, helped narrate and produce a documentary called Work is Our Joy. This is the net racks, that where we racked the nets. That's myself and my brother-in-law. On the left-hand picture, and this is a picture of the nets that we dried during the weekend after they're taken out of the bluestone tank. Well, the documentary that we're about to see doesn't indicate that Cecil was all but blind except for about 5% of his vision, and he continued to go on the river with other fishermen in Gillnetting. He had worked for years on the sailing grounds, part of the time without his sight. That's him on the right, on the Columbia River in the same boat after they hauled in the net, or they probably were about ready to lay out the net. Also featured on this documentary is Wilmer Johnson. I fished with Wilmer in Alaska for 2 summers. Wilmer was the toughest fisherman that I knew. I would get seasick every time that he went out. You could see it. He fished for 60 years. But the story of the Gillnetter now is told in this documentary better than I can tell it, so we'll listen. Documentary, I think, runs about 25 minutes, so many of you have to get another beer.
I couldn't really tell you when I decided I'd like to be a fisherman. But I remember my dad telling me towards the end of my high school career that I should prepare to go to college. And I told him, what for? And he says, you can get an education and get a good job. And I told him, I said, well, do you know a better job than this one? You're going to high school, but you know when you look out there and the guys are drifting, you know where your mind was. You're out there on the river.
Today's Columbia River Gillnet fleet shows the latest developments in modern technology. It is the culmination of over a century of history and adaptation to changing conditions on the river. At the same time, Gillnetting is often characterized as a traditional way of life. This is the story of the Columbia River Gillnetter. The voices heard here are from a series of oral history interviews housed in the Columbia River Maritime Museum in Astoria, Oregon, part of a community effort to preserve and explore the continuing traditions of the Pacific Northwest.
Moberg. I was born October 29, 1910 in Moberg. My father was born in Småland, Sweden, and he came to Astoria for the salmon fishing. He landed at the foot of 11th Street on March the 18th, 1898. He was 17 years old and had $17 in his pocket, and he couldn't speak a word of English. He fished the first 2 years as a boat puller for the Nelson boys, and then he got his own boat. And he had a 2-man boat, which in those days was the only type of fish boat that was used. And of course, you had to fish with the tides. You drifted down, and then you drifted back up, and then you came home.
Drift gillnetting began on the Columbia River in the early 1850s. 2 New Englanders fished commercially for salmon with a gillnet they had used in Maine. In those days, salmon was salted and packed in barrels and sold with limited success to a small market. It was the more reliable canning process that opened world markets to Columbia River salmon. The Hume brothers established the first cannery on the Columbia at Eagle Cliff, Washington Territory. They employed 4 gillnetters, and the first year they packed 4,000 cases of salmon. That was in 1866. By 1883, there were 39 canneries on the river, and the pack was over 500,000 cases.
During the fall and winter months, the cans and nets are made and everything got in readiness for the busy season.
Nellie Megler was the wife of pioneer canneryman Joe Megler.
About the 1st of April, the salmon began to come into the river. The canneries own most of the boats and nets, which they lease to the net tender. The price per fish varies with the season. Last year, 50 cents per fish was paid.
The expanding salmon canning business created a tremendous need for both fishing and canning labor. Each season, migrant workers from California and other parts of the West filled the boarding rooms and bunkhouses along the lower Columbia. Most were single men who had immigrated from Finland, Scandinavia, and the Mediterranean. Chinese were recruited for their skill in cleaning and packing. As immigrant fishermen sent for their relatives and established families, small, year-round fishing communities began to form around canneries and buying stations on both sides of the river.
Distance flew was about 1 mile wide, I say, and it was from 20 to 30 feet of water right across from shore to shore.
John Vlastelica was born in 1903. His parents were from Vis, an island in the Adriatic Sea. They settled in Clifton on the Oregon side.
In those days, you know, they talked about the United States, that money was flowing all over, and they all came over here to make big money. And he came over there, they worked for $1 a day. Can you imagine that? Barely got by. There was many float houses, you know, along the beaches where the people lived. The Italians were at the lower end, the Yugoslavs were in the center, and the Greeks were in the upper top. They're all Gillnetters. They used single nets, shallow single-floor nets.
The technology of gillnetting is centuries old. Most immigrant groups brought traditions of gillnetting from their homelands.
My family's been involved in fishing for, I would guess, at least 1,000 years. My dad fished in the Lofoten Islands off the coast of Norway, fishing for codfish.
Hank Ramvik lives in Burnside, Oregon. He talks about the gillnet.
In the early days, we used heavy linen nets up to 12 ply. That's almost like a wet gunny sack in comparison to the modern gear we use now. It's a series of meshes, and it hangs in the water in a diamond-shaped pattern, and the fish enter that naturally with their head, and they get caught by the head, by the teeth, or right behind his gills. And they use up to 11-inch mesh in them days. You caught some monstrous fish with 11-inch mesh.
On the Columbia River, there are two types of drift gillnet, the floater and the diver. The floater hangs down from the surface of the water from a line of floats known as a cork line, and is weighted on the bottom by a lead line.
Then we had what we call the diver net. It had much smaller floats. It only fished about 12 feet, 2 fathoms, but it went along the bottom. You had your diver leaded just so that it would sink, and then it would go with the tide down the river.
Gillnets were used from the mouth of the river to Celilo Falls. Net lengths varied according to the grounds. Today, the maximum length is 1,500 feet, but in many locations, shorter nets are used. Each fisherman experiments with the design of his nets, adapting his gear to local conditions. Elmer Harula fished diver nets out of Clatskanie.
The apron was to catch those foxy salmon that wouldn't hit the back with it. When they got close to the lead line, they would hear it, and they turned back and up, and they get paid.
In order to fish diver nets, debris had to be removed from the river bottom to prevent the nets from snagging and tearing. Fishermen began to organize into groups known as snag unions to clear the fishing grounds. Snag union members paid for the clearing of their drift and claimed a right to fish there. Drift rights could be sold or inherited.
I was executive secretary of Tuna Snag Union for 3 years.
Gunnar Hermanson fished for the Altoona Cannery on the Washington side.
And the reason for the closure is because these members that belong to the organization, they have quite an expense. They got to hire a diver, you got to have a pump, air pump, you got to go out there and work and locate the snacks.
Ross Lindstrom is a fisherman who was also a snag diver.
You know, the river is a good place to hide anything. We've got ships anchors, TV antennas, refrigerators, stoves, but mostly logs. One drift in Vancouver got a steam engine, 16-ton steam engine off there.
Drift rights also helped control access to the fishing grounds. Toots Peterson was a charter member of the Alderbrook Drift.
It was such a dog-eat-dog situation out there. You'd make
just got together and drew numbers, and you go out on your number when your time was up.
When the fisherman intruded on a closed drift, members would attempt to discourage him by laying their nets out in front of his net. They called it corking.
When you cork somebody right close, well, you deprive him of getting any fish. You will take the fish, but he won't get much. So all he could do was cuss and roll around, but they used to get in corking matches between fishermen in the old days. They'd spend the whole time picking up, corking each other. Neither one of them get any fish. They got a lot of work out of it. Those days you worked, you had to pick by hand. Nowadays it's a picnic. If you were a fisherman, you knew how to knit net. It was usually done in right the hole. They would do about 14 feet or so in a stretch and bring that back and then started to do it. And this went on all year long.
There's a rhythm. You work up a rhythm.
Georgia Mackey makes her living knitting and mending nets for fishermen.
One time when I was 14, my dad was knitting some net for another man, and I'd been watching him, and while he was out fishing, I thought, well, I'm going to try that. And he came home from fishing early, and here I'm knitting net. And he was very angry. He said, if that was my net, that would be fine, but that is not my net, so don't bother it. He came over and looked what I'd done. He said, here, go ahead and do it. I've been doing it ever since. Different ones said they knew I was knitting because the windows were singing. You'd go by and hear their windows vibrating, and the windows were singing.
On Sunday night, the season started at 6 p.m. Fishermen would go out, and most of the old timers wouldn't come back till Wednesday. Wednesday, they usually come home to replenish their grub supply and get gas and then take off again. Then they usually come home Saturday morning, and that was net racking day. They'd rack the nets and bluestone them and mend them, go out again Sunday night.
We lived about 4 blocks from the net rack where my dad tied his boat. My dad's boat had a 7-horse Regal. And, you know, you got so you knew the sounds of those different engines. And when I was a little boy, I had a big dog, Nick. My mother knew it was time to get dinner on the table because Nick, the minute he heard my dad's engine coming, he'd take off like a streak for the net rack. He knew that engine.
In the early decades of gillnetting, the boats were powered by sail and oar. Around the turn of the century, the first gasoline engines were being installed. Oliver Dunsmore recalls the transition period.
The boat that my own pole that I started with, he had a double cylinder 7 horsepower pumper. That was as much power as anybody had at that time. I carried the sail along for a couple of years after I started with him. They didn't have too much confidence in that old gas engine at that time.
In about 1920, they started converting these 2-man boats to 1-man boats, what we call. The old 2-man boats were stern pickers. The 1-man stood in the stern and pulled the net in. And then when we went over to the 1-man boats, then you had the net in the bow.
The timber bow picker was such an outstanding type of boat.
Jack Markovich of Clifton, Oregon, fished the bow picker until recent years.
It was a good sea boat, it was a good packing boat, it had good load of fish, it ran well, it was a pretty good speedboat, it was a handy boat. Never had been around any type of boat that was more adapted for a fisherman than thunder bow picker.
There have been many changes in gear and boats during the 20th century. Power rollers made it easier to haul in the nets. They have been replaced by power reels. Nylon nets have replaced linen. The boats, originally made of Port Arthur cedar with oak frames, are now made of fiberglass or aluminum. Eldon Corpora fishes the bridge towhead out of Astoria.
My grandfather started fishing here about 1895. My
my grandfather had 4 sons that were all fishermen. Both my daughters fished with me on the Columbia River, and one still does. You want to try to be in an area where you can get low water, where you don't go down too far. If you go down too far, you'll snag or something happen, you won't catch any fish. And there's always 3-4 boats that are going to be in that particular time area, and only a couple of them get the good drift.
It's all timing. It was all timing. Within 5 minutes.
Bill Gunderson is a 3rd-generation fisherman.
My grandfather passed it on to my father, and my father passed it on to me, because precisely at 4 hours and 5 minutes, the fish will drop off of the sands and into the deep hole where your net is. The fish haven't changed their pattern just because we have different boats and different gear. The fish still follow the same prehistoric habits of when they move off the sand into the channel and down.
You cannot teach anyone gillnetting. You have to do that by experience. For the simple reason, you have different tides, you have different drifts. Every drift and tide coincides with the fishing for gillnetting. There is no teaching about it. Teaching is out.
We got about 40 colors in, no fish yet. The first expression fishermen use for drift we don't catch any fish. One is they call it a skunk.
Today's fishery takes place primarily during the fall and during the winter season in late February and early March. John Vlastelicia remembers when the seasonal round was quite different.
One time we had a run of very nice big salmon in June, August. They come in every year until I guess they think that the Grand Coulee Dam had blocked them off. And there certainly hasn't been many since. I got one about 68 pounds. They're beautiful salmon.
Salmon are anadromous fish, born in fresh water, but spending part of their life cycle in salt water. As the end of their cycle approaches, they return to the stream of their birth in order to lay their eggs and begin the cycle again. Until 1889, only the premium spring and summer Chinook were packed. But as the demand grew, the cannery started packing coho, sockeye, steelhead, chum, and other anadromous species. Columbia River sturgeon are still taken today as incidental catch. These fish could reach phenomenal size.
And they also tell about the sturgeon that the guy got in the gill net that was so big that he pulled in 6 feet of the head before he saw the eyes. And
Many fishermen survive the winter by fishing smelt. Andrew Marikovich from Clifton recalls the smelt fishery as both tedious and chilly.
A lot of times you would pick that net up with smelts in it. By the time you came back to the scow to pick, that net was frozen. Pulled everything in the scow and had a stove there. So the net was off, pick them up. On my share, if I made $20 that day, that was a big week. Yeah, that was tough pickings.
My dad always had Stanley that the first salmon he'd catch, he'd bring home and invite the whole neighborhood in, and we would have the salmon feed and slice it up in slices. And it was usually a great big salmon. That's all we know, was bread and butter and salmon and milk and coffee. That was our neighborhood brawl.
It is a pretty sight in the early twilight of a pleasant day to see the boats with sails all spread, skimming along the water on their way to the fishing grounds. Then it seems as though the fisherman's life must be a pleasant one. But when, as is more often the case, it rains, as it can only rain in Oregon, the romance vanishes. And as we draw the curtains to shut out the dreariness, it is with earnest hope that no boat will be capsized by the gale, or that in the darkness and fog, none may drift outside the bar, for the river is rapid and broad.
If the wind is blowing, the waves are there. And when they're curving, don't look into it. There's a little pancake and go bottoms up in
time.
You know, the channel was always a pretty good fishing ground, and they'd take a chance, and in the early days when they had low power and all hand power, you couldn't get your net back in time to avoid getting run down or have your net cut.
We always, the fishermen that fished around the channel, had a big butcher knife that was just like a razor in a sheath up in the bow. And Dad was many, many times ready to cut the net and we'd run.
I have seen boats that have been run down by steamers, so they do a remarkably good job of annihilating the unit.
Until the mid-20th century, gillnetters competed with other commercial fishermen for both fish and fishing grounds. Seining operations and fish traps were often controlled by canneries. By the 1880s, gillnetters had formed the Columbia River Fishermen's Protective Union, one of the oldest fishermen's unions on the West Coast. The union set up a fund for clearing snags from the estuary. It also negotiated prices in disputes with the canneries, which were intensified by an increasing number of boats competing for the resource.
In the early years, the private companies, a lot of them had built up their own fleet of boats and their own nets, and they owned them. There was just a little bit with free boats and gear. Everybody wanted to get enough fish to just be ahead of the other packers.
Bill Pustonen recalls an account of the crowded conditions.
And the time came when that was so disorganized over there that they contracted with more fishermen than they could handle during a big run. And John Bell told the Times too, when the fishermen came in there, honestly expecting to make a nice little delivery, and they couldn't even deliver the fish. God, that was just murderous practically.
A depression in 1893 was a catalyst, leading to a major strike in 1896. The Fishermen's Union asked for a price of 5 cents a pound. The packers failed to agree on a compromise.
After we patiently and faithfully endured the struggle of the strike, we ran out of food.
Matt Corbola, from a letter to his relatives.
Then we were forced to go fishing at the price the canneries offered, 4 1/2 cents. But when the canneries had got us fishing, there wasn't a lot of fish in the river. They lowered the price almost immediately down to 2 cents a pound and set a limit of 500 pounds for each boat.
The strike had lasted 2.5 months. Cannery-controlled fish traps had been destroyed by striking gillnetters. The National Guards of both Washington and Oregon were called out.
Some gave up fishing and others fished at the said price, as there was no other work. After deliberations among fishermen, the unanimous decision was, let's build our own cannery. In our family there is a saying, beginning is always difficult, work is our joy, and industry overcomes bad luck.
My grandfather was a gillnet fisherman all his life on the Columbia River. That's all he ever did for a living. They were all hard-working people. Work is our joy, and it was a joy in our life, both. I think he believed that fishing was the only way to make a living.
Union Fishermen's Cooperative Packing Company became an industry leader and a mainstay of the region's economy.
They were an organization, not only a cannery, but they were a fishermen's service organization in many ways. They were part of the living society of fishermen. You had organized fishermen type of thinking and planning and operation.
The strike taught other cannerymen that they were better off sticking together. There were a number of attempts to consolidate various canneries into what became known as the Combine. In 1899, the Columbia River Packers Association was incorporated. It became a powerful force on the Columbia, maintaining an almost paternal relationship with its suppliers. Don Riswick fished under a number of cannery contracts.
Of course, back in the old days, the canneries used to furnish gear. They furnished the boat. You paid rent. Because you could get down there and order a net in January and then back and forth. But then if you went and sold fish to somebody else and they caught you doing it, then that cut your credit off.
Wilmer Johnson fished for CRPA most of his life. He and his wife Stella were married in 1931.
When we settled up with the company, I had $7 and something coming, and
advanced me $15.
We thought we was millionaires.
I said, we don't need any more money in this island. I said, we get home and we catch enough fish to eat on.
We got in the boat at Cascade Locks and came all the way down to it. I was only 16 years old and never been away from home in my life, and was the lonesomest person on earth when I got here, not knowing nobody. We lived up in Altoona, over the water in the bunkhouse. There was 4 or 5 other bachelors there, and we was the only married couple living amongst them all. It was awful.
Wilmer's catches were consistently high, and he was treated well by the cannery.
Anybody that's young, if you like the fish, you go at it, you know, that's the point. I told our grandson when he come down there one day, I said, you see all them boats in the Moberg? I said, you know they're not going to catch a fish. We don't know whether we're going to catch any or not, but if we lay out, we got a chance.
During the August season, many fishermen would go to the lower Columbia to fish. At one time, this seasonal migration filled the communities near the mouth of the river.
The whole river would move down, and all the fishermen from upriver. Us fishermen had to go down from Clinton while we get ourselves a bunkhouse and stay down there. Sometimes the family would come down and stay, and they enjoyed the beach down there while we were fishing.
I often thought how organized their life was and how simple, because on Mondays we knew what the food was going to be. It was a combination of rice and peas. It was called Easy Peasy. And on Friday we had pasta azul. We'd cook it on the sweet stove and have wine. It was a celebration. The fishing was a celebration. It wasn't a highball operation like it is now, Babe Ruth bars and Twinkies and wide open. Every night there was a send-off. It was a party. The sun was starting to set, and the men would climb down the ladders, and the wives would be there, and the children. The boats would take off. Then the wives would pull the lines up, and then head back to the bunkhouses, and light the lamps, and wait till they hear the sound of the voice. They were totally involved in their support. They were support for the work, for the men.
One thing I'm going to drop the anchor, and as we were here, some folks already that had their wanted to cook and eat. They were playing cards, folks who both talked together. Just common socialization of the fishermen, guys fishing right out in their element. You even heard some moth organs, and so there were several places doing that. There were widespread anchors, accordions, and it was kind of nice to just listen.
After low water in Hungry Harbor, you could see maybe 300 lights. And they'd throw the anchor and sit there, and you'd see the kerosene stoves flare up. And I could always smell the coffee, and they'd sit there talking and waiting till they could buck down a little bit on the tide and lay out for high water.
Well, I was sitting there myself and just leaning against the cabin wall, and doggone it, then finally, somewhere over to the Mediterranean side, came this chap after a bit. I don't know how exactly, but a violin came. Well, how in the heck, he tentatively was trying a few notes, just sort of testing things out, I guess. And then he struck off onto a Chattanooga here, just about as clear as it could be in the night, and eventually he had it all to himself.
the sight of a salmon coming over your door.
I think the fellas that were born into it, that grew up in the game, make the best fishermen. They have a sense for it. You can take any guy and make him a farmer, but he won't have that feel for the soil. He can't pick up a handful of soil and tell you if it's ready to plow or plant. He don't have the feel for it. That's the same way with Gillnetting. They have a feel for it.
I think that it's probably a matter of receiving joy in what you're doing. There are some people who just fish and others who love to fish. There are times when I fish for long periods of time, but the boat and the water and the sky and the net and the whole works becomes one. I'm part of that. Everything's working at one time. It's a marvelous oneness that occurs.
Hungary Harbor is right when you go over the Washington Bridge. Up the river, that's where Hungary Harbor is located. Bill Gunderson was our art teacher at Astoria High School. He was also football coach and one of the premier calligraphers in the state of Oregon. Quite an unusual guy. Gillnetting has been under siege since the seining was outlawed back in 1950. I interned in 1967 and 1969 for Ted Bugas, who was a lobbyist for Moberg Seafoods, and Senator Bill Holmstrom, and they were battling to keep the Gillnetting open and alive at that time. It's still under siege. The fish now maybe 1 or 2 days on the river. John, is that correct? Richard Fisher, see back there at Gillnetting. We're fighting for the survival of the fishing industry then. Not much has changed in 50 years. But be happy to answer any questions. Thank you for your patience here this evening. So, I think Rod had a question, who makes the nets and who pays for them? Well, the fishermen had to pay for them. And England Marine fish provided the netting, and the fishermen would actually bend the nets and cork line, lead line, and you would use needles like this to bend the nets and hook the netting onto the cork line and also onto the lead line. Corks like this, and they don't have any lead. It's very deceiving. But the fishermen will all do that off season. Yes, Kevin?
Well, I would say, what percentage would you say would be multi-generational, like you're at generation to generation? What percentage?
There were,
Great.
it was a great percentage, I would say, third and fourth generations. I felt fortunate that I was not able to have my 3 daughters in the fishing industry. Basically, it was hard work, but a whole lot of wisdom was imparted by our elders. Wilmer Johnson, who got seasick every time he went out, he always said, you can't catch any fish until you lay out the net. And we laid out the net time after time after time and fished probably twice as long as most of the other fishermen. And as a young teenager, I didn't want to fish with him the second summer, to be quite honest with you, but he taught us a lot of persistence and hard work. Somebody else have a question?
You made the course?
My father made all of his course, yes.
You start at one block and drill a hole?
They cut the cedar at Nikolai Mountain, which is by Glasgow. They brought the cedar in, cut about 8 or 10 inches, put them through a punch, And I used to bore the holes in the board. My father, he did have some help, but he would put them on the wood lathe. These were all handmade with the lathe.
So, did you trick, you know, when the Altoona cannery fell in the river, we were up there right side of it, picked up some that were coated in wax?
Yes.
Did you dip them in wax?
Yes, there was a paraffin shop, and those, most of these corks were taken to Alaska, used in Alaska. These are all paraffin, these are diver corks. They're smaller corks because the net would sink to the bottom. And most of them were paraffin because they would last longer.
Did you have to dip them every year or just once?
I dipped them all the time. They used to dry. I would put them on the lathe, actually make the cork, and then they would take them down about 2 miles away, and they would dry for I think 3-4 months. And I would bring them back and actually put them in big paraffin tanks and preserve them. Well, thank you very much for coming this evening.